Hello, my name is Jacque Dolgoff. I was born and raised in Omaha up till my 24th year. And I was born at 1824 North 24th Street, above my dad's hardware store. During my formative years, well, maybe I should go back to when I went into kindergarten. Well, we went into kindergarten at Long School, and when I was 10 years old, we moved out north to Minnelusa area, and my family owned a house there on 2441 Bowman from 1927 up to 1955. But unfortunately, my mother passed away in 51, so my dad had to move in with my oldest sister, whose name was Ida Potash. She passed away at 94. Now, going back to what grade school I went to after Long School was Minnelusa out north. And I was there until I graduated from that school in 1931. Now, in 1930, from my grade school, I wasn't anything particularly brilliant or anything like that, because I'm just a normal kid who had to go to school because his parents made him go. Well, anyway, I went into, I was at this Central High for about a year, and then I decided that college preparatory, I was having problems with college preparatory courses, so I thought maybe I better go into a business atmosphere, because my dad had a hardware store, and I'm sure that he wanted me to eventually work with him, which I did in my high school days. But anyway, so I went to Tech High, and I graduated from Tech in 1937. Well, during my Tech High days, my only real interests, although I took business courses and just average passing grades, I was involved with the music department in their glee club, and I took voice, and I also studied with the voice teacher's husband. Now that's a story in itself. How was I able to take voice lessons? Well, at the time I was 15 or 16 years old, in my second year in high school, why I decided to take a music course, join the glee club, just for the social aspects of it. And I was a bass, and they seemed to feel that I had a pretty good voice. Had no musical background per se, but they thought I had a pretty good voice. So I was in the glee club and appeared in their light operas that they had, like Robin Hood and Pirates of Penzance, a couple of the Gilbert and Sullivan operettas they put on. But I wanted to take voice lessons. And my dad says, I'm sorry, I can't afford it. The business isn't that good. This was back in 36 and 37 when business wasn't all that good. So I decided I would quit school for a year and go to work for a packing house at $13 a week. And I did it for 2 semesters. And how did I get my job? Johnny Rosenblatt's brother, I think he was his stepbrother, if I'm not mistaken, who was hearing impaired. And when he had worked during that summer for this particular packing house. And through him, since his mother and my mother were very close friends, I was able to find out that he was going back to school and the job was going to be available. So I decided to take it, and I did it for 2 semesters, and took voice lessons with a friend of mine who had a beautiful tenor voice. and we for an hour, half an hour a piece. It cost us $1.50 a piece, and we took voice lessons together. In fact, we still remain friends to this day. He lives in Burbank, California, a beautiful tenor voice, but unfortunately, his wife passed away recently. But we have been in touch, and I have gone to his son's wedding and all these kind of things. We're very close friends. His name is Roy Lindequist. But anyway, so after I graduated school, I worked with my dad until my 24th year, and then I went into the Army, and I with the Nebraska National Guards. I hadn't ever been anywhere, so I figured this would be a good way to go to learn to know something of other than Omaha. So I was in the outfit for I think about a year and a half or 2 years, and eventually they were called up to go to Alaska from California. We did go to maneuvers in Louisiana in 1941. I went into the Army in 1941, and then when Pearl Harbor happened, why we were sent out to the West Coast to do more or less police work. They were afraid of the submarines coming, Japanese submarines coming in. So my outfit was up and down the coast of Southern California, and just policing, and from the viewpoint of security, but nothing ever happened. But anyway, so when the outfit had to go to Alaska, they split it up. I had hurt my back earlier in my stay in the service, and so I was put on what they call limited service, and I was transferred to a casual outfit that was stationed near Riverside, California, Camp Hunt. So they gave me the job as postal clerk. So it was a newly formed organization, so I had to forward, make sure that all the mail was forwarded to the right way. But then they established a station hospital there, and they needed a postal clerk. So I was given the job. I was sent up there, and they gave me the job as a postal clerk, which I did for 9 months while at this particular hospital. Then later on, when we got a new second lieutenant, he wanted to change all the personnel around, and I was put on a ward as a bedpan commando. But anyway, so during that time, they didn't send me to any kind of a medical school. I mean, any kind of a training, technician training school. But and we had to get all our instructions from our doctors and our men and nurses. We did have occasional, technician classes, but they weren't formal, what you'd call really formal technician classes. But anyway, so in January of '45, the USS Comfort was located. They had come back from the Philippines and the Far East, and were looking for volunteers because the Navy didn't have enough personnel to give them corpsmen or Navy personnel. So there was maybe about 10 or 15 of us volunteered, and we went aboard on the USS Comfort. And during that period, the USS Comfort, we were on for about 4.5 months. But during that time, we were going over the first trip in January. All we did was bring a lot of supplies to Hollandia, because the hospital ship was a converted freighter that had been converted to 750 beds, and it was painted all white with a Red Cross on it. It adhered to Geneva Convention. And so anyway, after going to New Guinea and the Philippines and the different islands, we did pick up patients. During my tour of 4.5 months, we carried, roughly speaking, about 2,600 patients. and we dropped them off at Guam, and things like that. But on the invasion of Okinawa, there was just 2 hospital ships who were available, the Comfort and the Mercy. The Mercy, incidentally, was all Navy, but the Comfort had Army personnel as part of the medical department. And incidentally, our commander was an Omaha boy by the name of Joe Linsman. He was a lieutenant, I think, yeah. He was a lieutenant colonel, but he was a radiologist. But he was our commander, and but just as an aside, and he was like I say, he was our commander. But anyway, on the invasion of Okinawa, after our second trip of picking up Marines who had gone into to Okinawa, our first trip we picked up about 500 wounded people and took them to Guam. And our second trip we picked up another 500, and we were going back to Guam when we were hit and attacked by a kamikaze plane. There was considerable damage done, and fortunately I was working down below on an ambulatory ward, so I wasn't hurt at all or anything. But on the superstructure deck, where there was the x-rays and the surgery and a number of 1 or 2 other clinics, there were patients lined up to be taken care of, and 29 people were killed, which included the chaplain, although he was wounded, but he from all the burns and everything, he passed away a couple of days later. But there was 29 people who were killed, which included some of our corpsmen who were on duty. So we were ordered, of course, to take all of our. Luckily, we did list for a while, but fortunately, a destroyer came alongside and saw that we were able to still function. And by the way, we have to give credit to the Navy personnel. They did a beautiful job in cleaning up all the mess that was done there and saving us from having more damage than it was. But anyway, so from there, they took our patients to Guam. We unloaded our patients in Guam, and then we were there for a few days, evaluating how much damage there was, how long it would take us to get back to the States, because they wanted to send the ship back to the shipyard where it had been originally outfitted, which was in San Pedro in the Los Angeles area. So so we were sent back, and it took us about 4 weeks to get back. We spent, we were in Hawaii at Pearl Harbor for about 3 days before they sent us back to San Pedro, Consolidated Shipyards. Anyway, about a month and a half or 2 months, I had earned enough points to be considered for discharge, because they were lining up point personnel to getting it ready for discharge, because the war had been over. It was out, I think it was in August of '45 that it ended with Japan. And so in October of '45, I was discharged and I was sent home. And then I didn't stay in Omaha for very long. I still had a crazy idea, which I realized later on it was a crazy idea. But anyway, being young, not knowing any better, I decided I was going to go to New York. I had a GI Bill. I could go to school if I wanted to. They were going to pay for it. Government was going to pay for it. So I did go to New York, and I had the interest of a very fine voice teacher. Incidentally, David Lazarus was the one who I studied with. I don't know if you ever remember David Lazarus, but anyway, he himself had a beautiful baritone voice and had gone to the University of Cincinnati and the conservatory there, and had sung and done professional work in addition to, he originally had come from Tech, And so with his influence, I decided to go to New York, and his teacher was impressed with my voice, but unfortunately, I didn't have the musical knowledge and musical training that was really required to. But at the time, when you're young, you don't know all these things. You think, oh, you think everything's going to be peaches and cream. Well, it just didn't turn out that way. And after a year and a half with him, I decided that my dad had been always asking me to come back. He wanted to retire himself, and he wanted me to be with my younger brother, who incidentally was a combat infantryman in Europe during the war, and he was wounded twice. So we went into the business with my dad. I mean, I went into business, but I saw that after 6 months, we were having differences that I thought wasn't really conducive to a good business relationship. So I had worked in New York for a hardware manufacturing concern, and I took a test with the IRS, and I was accepted, and I worked for them for about a year. But in the meantime, in November of '47, I got married to a Holocaust survivor whom I had met in New York City. Incidentally, I lived at the Jewish wife for about a year and a half there on 93rd in Lexington while I was going to school. And I met her, and we were very friendly for about 3 months. She went to Chicago to see her uncle, and I went back to Omaha to work with my dad. And in the meantime, we were corresponding with each other. I went to Chicago a couple of times. She came to Omaha a couple of times. And her family life, she was visiting her. She had an uncle on her mother's side living in Chicago. And incidentally, she had been in, during the war, she had been in Kovna Ghetto and Struthof concentration camp. But so we got married. After we got married, then we lived with our family in a family home on Walnut Street for a year. But she was interested in wanting to go back to New York because of she had Lithuanian friends who would come over, and they were forming a Lithuanian organization, and she wanted to go back there. So I was able to contact my old boss, and he said my job was still there if I wanted it. And so, but for an Omaha boy to go to New York City cold, without an education, without a reputation of having done some really fine things, and there's so much competition there, I would have been lost, and I would have never gotten a job. But since I had this job, it was a low-paying job, but it was a job, something that I could manage with in New York. But anyway, so after about a year, I went to work for an engineering firm, which I was with for 7 years, where I learned more about accounting than I had ever learned any other place, and cost accounting and the accumulation of manufactured costs and the burden and overhead and depreciation, all those technical things that are supposed to be learned in accounting. But I never had more than the senior clerical level of working. But anyway, we managed. My wife worked. She spoke 7 languages. Went to gone in 1937, 38. Had gone to a private girls' school in Paris. Her family was. I never knew, but of course were considered well off. And but when the Russians came in, they confiscated everything, and then they couldn't get any more out of the Lithuanian Jews, so they turned it over to the Germans, and the Germans finished everything off, by sending people to labor camps and all the Schwarzjor that you've read about and you know about as far as the Holocaust is concerned. Well, anyway, and then when let's see, where was I at? When you go from one room to the next, at 84, you can say, what the hell am I doing here? But that's all right. But anyway, Oh yeah, in 1963 she developed multiple sclerosis. My first wife, and and she gave me three sons during that from 1950 to 1956. Yeah, three boys were born during that period. But anyway. When my last job with the engineering firm was going to be sent to Connecticut, they wanted me to go with them in doing their timekeeping. I was a senior timekeeper with them when I had to report all the performances of the employees there to our production control and to our engineering staff, who were determining what they called standards. In other words, expected performances of the employees. My wife didn't want to go to Connecticut, and so we decided, well, I knew 6 months in advance about the job, and I was going to get a bonus if I stayed to the very end until the manufacturing facilities in Connecticut took over everything in New York. And in fact, I had to consolidate the labor costs for both places until they actually moved. But anyway, so how did I meet my wife? That's something that should be interesting to tell. The Jewish Community Center, no, I shouldn't say that. It's it's the YM and YWCA of New York, and it has about I think about 10 or 11 floors there. Where boys and girls have they have everything. The swimming pool, the whole 9 yards like you have here in the Jewish Community Center here. And they had a very fine cultural arts program. And but anyway, they wanted one year. I think about 6 months before 6 months after I came into the place. Why they wanted to have a program made up of people living there. So they asked me to sing. So I sang Road to Mandalay. I happen to know it. And she danced the hula. And that's exactly how we met. You know, she got interested in me, and I felt flattered that she was 7 years, now she was 9 years younger than I was. I was flattered that she was interested in me, you know. So we developed a relationship, and eventually we got married. But getting back to, where am I at now? Getting back to, how did I get my job? When I worked for her cousin, who was Sam Rosen, a very influential Jewish, Orthodox Jewish businessman. He had brought her over from Europe, and he lived on Park Avenue and had 3 children of his own. One daughter who was about the same age as Adele, my wife. And as I look back, she would have been better off staying with them rather than moving into the Jewish Y. But she was a very independent person. She wanted to be on her own, so she moved in the Jewish Y. So that's where I met her. And then when I knew in advance that I was going to have to look for another job, she kept bothering his wife. Why Sam can't give Jacque a job working for his organization? Stanley Warner Theaters. They had about 50, I don't know. Well, just in what they called the New England zone, where eventually I worked there for 9 years in Newark, and that's when the district office was. They had about 50 theaters. They had bought the interest of the Warner Brothers exhibition arm, which was their theaters. They had a production company, they had a distributing company. But because of the Supreme Court's breaking up of big corporations, you know, the Warner Brothers had to sell off their exhibition arm, which was Warner Brothers Theaters. Well, anyway, so about 4 months before I had to get the job, I get a call from his secretary, and she says, "Mr. Rosen wants to see you. Would you make an arrangement to come up to his office and talk to him?" Now here, I've been in New York over 7 years, 8 years, never once having seen him and gone to him and everything. But he did send us a nice wedding gift, you know. So, but anyway, I was flattered, of course. I said, "Here's Sam Rosen." Who I'd heard so much was, you know, it made donations to the Yeshiva University, and he was quite a influential man in Jewish circles. Although he married into the family, but he was a terrific businessman. I have to give him that. God bless him. But anyway, and the family was the Fabian family, who had all kinds of theaters on their own, and with the help of the First National Bank of Boston, they were able to buy 18% of the stock that was required for getting Warner Brothers theaters. And his brother-in-law was the president of Stanley Warner Theaters, and he was executive vice president of Stanley Warner Theaters. Anyway, getting back to going in to visit him, the first thing he said to me when I went into the office, he says, "Jack," he said, "why don't you tell your wife to stop bothering me?" I says, "Hey, she's your cousin." I says, "My wife," I says, "knowing what she's been through, I'm trying to be a halfway decent husband." I said, "I don't." So he says, "Well, look," he says, "I don't know what you know or what you don't know." He says, "I don't know whether I can," because he was very much afraid of nepotism. Because even though he had his own two sons working, but they were being paid through the Fabian Enterprises business. But anyway, so he says, "You're going to have to be interviewed by my controller and by the treasurer of my company." I says, "Sam, I only have the experience of a clerk, a senior clerk." I said, "I use a comptometer, and I had some accounting. I've studied accounting and various." He says, "Look," he says, "I don't want to use my influence unless somebody else tells me that you're okay." He said, "All right." So I went up there for the interview about a month or so later, and I was talking to them. I told them what my experiences were at the Unimax Switch division of the W.L. Maxon Corporation, and they said, "Well, there's only one. We'll have to get back to you." All right, got back to me, and they said, "There's only one place we have a place that's open in Newark, is in the film buying department, in their accounting section of their film buying department." And he says they want somebody as soon as possible. I said, "Well, look, I got a promise of a bonus coming." I says, "I don't know when, I don't know exactly." I said, "I think within the next 6 weeks." I said, "I think I can come in and go to work for you." I says, if whoever I'm going to work for before is going to be satisfied with my background." He said, "Well, all right." He says, "We'll let you know." And then about a week or so later, they called me from the Newark office, and this supervisor who I had to be interviewed by the district manager, the film buyer, and him. So I got to a point where I was a little bit disgusted with all these interviews. And I says, "Look," I says, "you know I'm no mover and shaker," I says, "on these jobs." I says, "I'm just going to be a clerk." I says, "Why don't I sit down with you for 4 hours at your convenience, and if you think I can do the job, tell them in New York that you think I can do the job, and then we'll talk further." I sat with him for 4 hours. He liked what I did. He says, "Can you?" He says, "When can you come? When can you start?" I said, I don't know yet. I said, maybe about 4 or 5 weeks. Oh, I need somebody on Monday. I said, well, I said, I got a bonus promise, and I says, and I says, with my kids and everything, I says, I can use that bonus, I says. And so he says, well, he says, I don't know. Well, anyway, they waited for me for 6 weeks until I can, then I went to work for them in Newark for 9 years, and when they still, 7 years later, 7 years later, when they decided to consolidate all of their offices, I was moved into the home office, and I worked in the home office on Broadway for 2 years. In the meantime, from 1963 to 1971, my wife was suffering from multiple sclerosis, and I had to do whatever I could. She was one of the first to get Medicaid in New York City. It was costing me, because of my income and her income from Social Security and everything, I had to lay out. To be eligible for Medicaid, I laid out $300 every month, but they took care of everything on the family medical expenses in New York State. Okay, so in the meantime, my oldest son was being prepared for his bar mitzvah, and we had a yeshiva university student come over to the house 3 times a week to help him out. And my other son went to a Hebrew school in the neighborhood but my oldest son, both of them went to university, to City College of New York. Gene got because of his interest in holography, they gave him a laboratory, and he worked in college and he never got a degree because they never had he got a lot of honorariums. He got quite a few honorariums, but he never got what you call a formal degree. But anyway, but he always, ever since he was 11 years old, he would work as an assistant with the neighborhood television man. He's a great television man, and he liked Gene, and so Gene would, whenever he wanted him to help out, and that's how Gene began to learn his television. And another thing, he was one time he served as a volunteer policeman up in our area, and one time he turned in a fire and got the highest award from New York City for his his ability to recognize an emergency, and he turned it in and everything. But as far as Gary is concerned, Gary was always interested in comic books. He went to school, and but he too never graduated from, never got a degree from college. But he went to school for about 4 years. He had state scholarships, But anyway, so I had to fight the Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center to take care of Adele properly. We were on Medicaid, and they were just beginning to take Medicaid in, and how did she get in? How did she get recognized for Medicaid? She kept bothering Robert Kennedy's office, the Senate office, on the phone, and telling her of problems that they need medical help and everything. And that's when Medicaid just came in. Hadn't been fully formulated yet, but they knew it was passed in New York State. So that eventually his office used his influence to get her 4 hours of assisted living at home, which eventually ended up an 8-hour assisted living for Medicaid. And like I say, I continued to pay $300 a month, and the family was being taken care of at the Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center in their outpatient, and she had to go in and out of the hospital a lot of times. But we had the clinic appointments there at Columbia Presbyterian, and they had if anybody knows the Columbia Presbyterian, it's probably one of the greatest, considered one of the finest hospitals in the world. So they say. But when it comes to neurological diseases, they still have a lot to learn about them, but that's all right. But anyway, she passed away in '71 after having to go to a nursing home in the Bronx, which if I'd have known what they were doing to her there, I would have fought a little harder, but unfortunately I didn't know enough about it to make a stink like I did with the Columbia Presbyterian. I wrote a letter to the chairman of the board of Columbia Presbyterian Hospital, who was happened to be the chairman of the board, CEO of Texaco. I wrote 7 pages. I was threatening to write letters to newspapers and everything else, so they wouldn't take care of it, because they didn't know anything about multiple sclerosis. You know. But anyway, so finally in 1971 she passed away, and she's buried up in Westchester County in a Jewish cemetery up there. And my youngest son, unfortunately, he was a problem from the time he was 12 years old until he was killed in a crazy gun shooting situation. They were playing around, he was with his boyfriend. They're playing around with a gun, and they must have been playing Russian roulette or whatever they were playing. I don't know. It happened on a Sunday. In fact, when he was going to go on this Sunday, I told him, I says, Douglas, I says, you shouldn't be going. These boys are older than you. I says, your friends should be more your age. He said, well, I don't know, Dad. He said, I've known them for a long time. He said, and I knew one of the boys, so I figured, all right, I'm not going to, but I really should have put my foot down and say, you're not going. But I didn't, like a fool. Now I realize. And he was killed. They were playing around with guns and he got killed. So that's more or less. And then after, well, all right. Incidentally, Sam Rosen passed away in a heart attack walking up Park Avenue when he was 70 years old. So that's the man who had all these connections and everything else. So, but anyway, when about 3 months after he passed away, I did go up to the apartment every day. When they were sitting Shiva, and that's when I really got to know the family. I never knew the family before that. About 3 months later, the younger son, David, says, Jacque, because he was the one who got me the job with the Chelsea Bank afterwards that I worked for 3 years until they merged with another bank. But anyway, that's another story. But anyway, his wife, Eleanor Rosen, who was a Fabian, she called me up. She says, we have 7 suits of Sam's that we want to give to some member in the family. I says, well, those suits wouldn't fit me. I says, you got 3 boys. I said, I've got 2 sons, and what's a son-in-law? No, there is 3 sons. What am I talking? I says, you've got Arthur, Charlie, and David. I says, why don't those boys? They're tall and they're about the same size. She says, no, they don't want these suits. They wouldn't feel right wearing their father's suit. I said, well, I understand. So she says, David will give you a call, and if you want the suits, they're yours, 7 of them. Custom-made suits, Fiora, the house of Fioravante. In fact, I still even got one of the suits as I'll keep it for remembrances. So that was more or less my experience in New York. And then about in 1975, actually about a year earlier, in '74, coming to Omaha for a bar, I think it was a bar mitzvah or wedding or something, I met a rabbi, an Orthodox rabbi, who was going to Lincoln to give an opinion about a particular, a rabbinical opinion about a particular, I guess it was legal. I mean, I didn't know the particulars of it, but he was going to Lincoln for to get his opinion about a particular situation. So, by chance, I sat right next to him. And while they were passing out the meals, I hear and I had ordered a kosher meal, and I don't know, I wasn't normally I never order a kosher meal when I fly, I mean, but this time, for some reason or other, I asked for a kosher meal. And sure enough, they sat me next to this rabbi. Beard, black coat, big hat, you know. It was the Borsalino hats that they wear, and the payas, and the whole 9 yards. But anyway, so they called over the loudspeaker, Jacque, we have a kosher meal for Jacque Dolgoff. Would you mind raising your hand so I know where to give it to you? So I raised my hand, and here he is sitting next to me. So after we got through eating, why, he says to me, he says, are you Jewish? I says, yeah. I said, of course, I says, yes. I said, but I'm going to I think it was a bar mitzvah, if I wasn't mistaken. And I did make a couple, 3-4 trips here, going to weddings and stuff like that. But anyway, so he says, you know, my line of work, he says, I meet all kinds of people. He says, you give me your name and address and telephone number. He says, are you interested in becoming establishing a relationship with a nice Jewish woman? I said, I'll give it a whirl. I said, but I'm really not ready to get married or anything like that. So about 3 months later, I get a call from my second wife. She's a school teacher in Boston. She's got her mother living in the Bronx. And at that time, I was still living in New York. And so we got together, and whenever she came down to visit her mother, we went out, and we had a relationship there that lasted until 75. And in 75, when my job was ending, I went to work for a couple of other people after that, but in fact, I worked for 3 years for the May department stores in their purchasing department as a cost clerk. And they were going to London. They wanted me to go to London with them. I says, no, I was already, let's see, I'm 7, 19. I must have been almost 60 years old, or maybe even a little older than that. No, I was older than that. Yeah, no. Anyway, I don't remember the exact time, but anyway. So I decided to go up to Boston. I was planning on, because they asked me if I wanted to be transferred to St. Louis or to Los Angeles, because they said we could get you a job out there. And I said, no. I said, I want to see what I can do after, because I was thinking about coming back to Omaha at that time. But anyway, so I went up to Boston, and about 3 days after I was in Boston, I got a job. So I got a room up there for about 4 or 5 months, and eventually I told her, I said, look, you have more to offer. She was a Boston school teacher. I've been a New York girl, went to Hunter College, had a master's degree in early education. She was a very bright woman, a very tiny woman. I don't think she weighed 100 pounds. But anyway, in fact, she went, after she retired, she went to a school for naturopathic medicine in Seattle. And she's living now in Boulder, Colorado, doing work in alternative medicine. She's some sort of a very religious girl. Orthodox, oh boy, I'm telling you. She was really Orthodox. I've always considered myself a secular Jew. I never considered myself, even though my mother and father were very, very religious. And they went to that little synagogue on 25th and Seward. Well, anyway, so then we decided to get married, and she had a 14-year-old son. She had to go to Mexico to get a get. She didn't get a get in Mexico, but she got a divorce in Mexico. Eventually she got a get. because in New York City to get a get, it's a real schlep. I mean, they want to know why, and they want to know the whole 9 yards why you want to get it. Because respectively, she's Orthodox. So eventually, she did get it. But her first husband wanted to be involved with her son. They had a son who was 14 years old at the time, but he had problems. He had his all kinds. He was dyslexic, and he had a couple of other problems. And he was getting to the point where he was beginning to grow, and she felt she needed a man around her. She never told me this, but later on I figured the whole damn thing out. I said, so we got married, and I lived with her for 7 years, and I got a job working for, I worked for 3 or 4 different firms there. Worked for a firm that was computer based. Let's see, I'm trying to think of the names of it. I have letters of reference from all these different places. But anyway, so the last job I had was with a CPA firm in Boston doing microfilming. And when she told me she wanted a divorce, well, I decided, hell, I'm not going to stay in New York. I'm not going to stay back east anymore. My boys wanted me to come back to New York, to be with them. I said, no, I'm going back to Omaha. I said, I'm born and raised there. I said, I got my nieces and nephew there. I said, I know they have families of their own. And I said, whatever I can do in Omaha, I'll do. So I came back to Omaha, and by that time I was on Social Security, and I lived for 10 years at the Lucas Hall on 38th and Cummings, that today is run by the Salvation Army. They own that building in the Salvation Army. And my last year and a half there, I did volunteer work in their finance department. And when I had the opportunity to be moved up, to come up here to Livingston, my sister, Ida Potash, had an apartment here. And they called me, when I first, maybe about 2 years after I got here, I signed up with them to get an apartment. They called me about 6 times and wanted to give me an apartment. I says, I wanted my sister's apartment because I know that eventually, she was 14 years older than me. I said, I felt that eventually she'd have to go into the Blumkin home. So I talked to her about it, and she said, well, as far as the furniture is concerned, whatever my kids don't want, I said, you can have it to use. And that's what finally happened. And so I've been living there since 1992, I think it was, yeah. And I managed to get along. I go to the VA hospital. They're a pain in the neck when it comes to care. I have Medicare, and I have a Medicare supplement. They don't, the VA doesn't bill Medicare. They won't bill Medicare. I've had problems with them as far as being charges. Now they finally gave me a break. I'm only paying for medication now. But they send medication, even when I don't need the damn medication, it still costs me money. So, with all due respects to my experiences, I don't think I've had an unusual life. Maybe some people might think so, but I don't think so. I mean, you cope with whatever the Almighty throws at you, and you hope for the best, and whatever will be, that's all.
Jacque, what year were you born
in? 1916.
1916.
November 23rd, 1916. Did I forget to tell you?
Tell me a little bit about growing up on 24th Street, with the businesses and so on.
Oh, well, they had all these different butcher shops and the fish stores and the grocery stores, and they had hardware stores, and they had some of the colored people. Well, above where we were at, the Margolins owned the building. There's another story I can tell you about that. But anyway, when the Margolins owned the building, and they would rent out apartments. Oh, this was after. Oh, wait a minute. No, the Margolin family first occupied the upstairs. Then eventually, little by little, they would, their personal finances, or for whatever reason, they decided little by little each member of the family moved out. So they still had the property, so they used it for board of Union Pacific porters who were going through from Omaha to Salt Lake City. And anyway, so but my dad still had this. He got this store in 1927. Before that, it was a garage, and he wanted more room, so he worked out a deal with the Margolins so that they fixed up the place for him, and he was paying them rent every month. But there was one time during the Depression when Dad couldn't meet the rent, and they had purchased a property on a mortgage from Omaha Building a Loan, and evidently Dad's rent was very important for their mortgage payments, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, so one time when he couldn't pay, they took out a judgment on him and they closed the store for about 3 months. But during that time, they couldn't meet their payments to Omaha Building a Loan. And Dad had customers, handymen, who used to come in the store and charge the Omaha Building a Loan and charge into whatever other company who Dad used to do business with, real estate companies. And when they got to a point, I think that they foreclosed on the Margolins, and Dad got the store back opened, and they reduced his rent for him, and he was able to stay in business. You see, so that was one aspect of my experience that I don't know. Somebody may find it interesting. I don't know, but anyway. Any other questions?
Did you have a lot of Jewish neighbors?
Oh yeah, a flock of them. There's all kinds of them, and they knew that Dad's hardware store. But we also had a lot of black customers, a lot of Schweitzer customers, and Dad gave them credit. If they had a job and everything, Dad would give them credit. And during the Depression, people who owed him money, and when he wasn't too busy, he'd go around to the different people who owed him money, and he collected a quarter here, a quarter there, 50 cents here, and nobody have ever reneged on paying off their debts. That's my impression. I don't know whether it's true or not, but that was my impression, because my dad said that he never had any kind of ill feelings against Schwartzes. He says, look, he says, they're human beings just like anybody else. He says, they got to live too. He says, and I'm here and I'm in business. They want to come and buy from me. And of course, he says, it's a risk to give them. He says, but I feel I can do it, so I do it.
When did your father close the store?
Well, actually, he didn't close the store. My young brother took over the store. And I think it was, roughly speaking, in 1955, my young brother, unfortunately, had his own problems with his first wife. And he had to eventually go into bankruptcy. My dad was in the business for 40 years, and through thick and thin was able to do it. But he, unfortunately, he got married, and he had pretty good ideas about wanting to live the good life, and because he had been in the service and was wounded twice in Europe. So, like I told you before, he was a combat infantryman. So he was entitled, actually, to, at least he thought he was. I don't know. I suppose we have to be as his brother. I loved him and everything else, but there's such a thing as establishing an equal situation where both of you could, thrive together. But that's the reason I quit my job and quit working for Dad and went to work for the IRS. In fact, while I was working the IRS, I took an exam and they wanted me to stay on, But in October, my wife wanted to go back to New York. Those are the key piece. So we went back to New York. But as I look back on it now, I would have been better off to stay in Omaha and gone to University of Nebraska at Omaha and further my training as an accountant. And I probably could. Now, one of the persons who I worked with at the IRS was Sam Kaplan, who became a CPA. Unfortunately, he's gone now, but he can corroborate the fact that he and I worked in the same building. We didn't work in the same office, but we worked in the same building.
Do you have a lot of contemporaries still around here in Omaha?
Now?
Yes.
I wouldn't say a lot, but there are quite a few, but I do belong to 3 veteran organizations. I'm a life member of the Jewish War Veterans, the Veterans of Foreign Wars, and the Disabled American Veterans. How did I become a disabled American veteran? If you have been in the hospital one day while you're in the service, you're entitled to become a DAV member. The Veterans of Foreign Wars, you have to have served overseas. Jewish war veterans, they take anybody who's Jewish. So, being a Jew, I figured I better, I was a member for Jewish war veterans for a long time in New York. After my wife died, I joined them, and I used to go to meetings, participate in whatever volunteer work. We used to go to hospitals and whatever volunteer work they had. And if I could do it, I went with them, and helped out. But in fact, when I lived in Boston, I was very active in the Brookline Post number 72. In fact, one year they made me commander there. I went from junior vice commander to senior vice commander, and then to commander there. And in fact, one year I was commander of a lawyer in New York, a very, very prominent. I'm trying to think of his name. A very prominent lawyer he's still very active in the Jewish war veterans in Washington. I wish I've got a picture of him. I got a picture of he and I shaking hands, but can't think of his name, doggone it. Well, anyway.
Who's the members of your family still living here in Omaha?
I mean, my immediate family, my mother, father, and sister, nobody. I'm the only one left. I have a niece and a nephew. I have Merle Potash, I don't know if you know him, and Phyllis Wasserman is my niece.
Well, Jacque, it's been a pleasure talking to you today. I certainly enjoyed listening to you.
Well, I'm thankful that I have the opportunity to express myself, but I personally feel that whatever one has to do in life, as long as you have the health and the energy and the capability to do it, you have to perform. And whatever rewards you get from it, okay. And if you don't get the rewards, at least you tried.
Thank you, Jacque.
Okay.